So let's see how the orange one came out. Oh, that's so good. That's a really good print. I know that's gonna wash so good. Hi guys, it's me, Bratty Bree, and in today's video, I want to show you how I turned this picture of me into a sun printed shirt like this using Jacquard's Solarfast Cyanotype dye. Cyanotype is a technique that involves laying an object or a film negative over a dye that darkens when under UV light like the sun. Traditionally, this is how blueprints were made back in the day, but now it's a cool cameraless technique that allows you to create art on paper and fabric in a super unique way. I will go over all the supplies you need to get started, but most importantly is making sure that you get this specific dye. This is the brand I use by Jacquard, and it's called Solarfast Sunlight Developed Dye. It comes in a variety of colors, but in this video, I'll be using purple and orange. Besides the shirt, the blank white shirt, you can use any color shirt, but I find that the prints come up best on white. It's more vibrant. So besides the white shirt and the dye that you need, just to give you a bit of background about this, this is Solarfast Sunlight Developed Dye, and it's sunlight developed because once it's exposed to the sun, it's gonna expose a negative on your shirt. So a negative would be something like this, which is just an image that's been inverted to be negative. Once I put the dye down on the shirt, I put my negative over the dyed part, take it out in the sun, and the sun is going to expose all of the inverted image. So when I take it off, it's going to look less creepy than this. It's going to actually have the image, which is me holding my roller skate. That's how the dye works. I just wanted to make that clear. It works by being developed in the sun. So it's very important that you start off in a dark space. You don't have to be in a dark room per se, but I close the curtains and I'm in a relatively dark enough space that the sun won't penetrate the image too much. When you put it in direct sunlight, it's going to start developing right away. So you want to be careful where you apply your dye. So I close the curtains. This is good enough. I've been doing this a while that, you know, some people freak out. They're like, does that have to be complete darkness? What about the light that's coming through? It's fine. Just make sure you're not in direct sunlight right away. So the other things you'll need besides the white shirt and the dye, you'll need some paper towels. This helps when you put the dye down. You want to kind of like, you don't want it to be soaking wet. You want it to be damp. So I put a generous amount of dye on to make sure that I have an even amount on the shirt. And then I go in with paper towels to dampen it a little bit so it's a little damp before I put the film on top and not soaking wet. Then you also want to use some masking tape. I'll show you how I do this, but I usually use the masking tape to make a box of where I want the dye to go because I want it in a very specific spot. This is all depending on style. If you want it to look a little more rugged around the edges, just go crazy with the dye, put it anywhere, but I like it to look a little bit neater. So I use the masking tape to keep the dye on a specific part of the shirt. Then you want a sponge. If you don't want to use a sponge like this one, you can get these from the dollar store, which is a variety pack of sponges with little handles on them. I like to use these too, especially if I'm gonna use two different dyes. You don't want to use the same sponge because then you'll have two color dyes on your shirt, which comes out pretty cool. I've made that mistake before, but that wasn't my intention. I like to have a solid color dye on my shirt. So if you would like to use these are way more convenient if you're making more than one shirt at a time. So you don't have to worry about using the same sponge on accident. And they're really convenient for spreading your dye. These little things on top of this sponge, these are T-pins. I use these because I put a piece of cardboard in between the shirt when I'm making the print. That keeps the dye from seeping to the back of the shirt. And the T-pins help keep the film negative on top of the shirt in place. So it'll make more sense when you see me do it. This is optional. You don't have to use this. In order to keep the film on top of your shirt, you can also use clear tape. You don't have to use the pins. Another thing you might need are gloves because the dye, you won't see it on your hands if you get it on your hands, but when you go outside and you expose your hands to the sun, and if you have dye on it, it'll darken on your hands. You'll have like purple or orange or black, whatever color dye you're using, it'll start turning that color on your hand. So I use gloves to make sure that I don't accidentally dye my hands. It'll wash out, but it's just one of those things, you know, like if you're a painter and you don't want to get paint on you, most likely wear an apron. It's like the same idea. And then sometimes I like to use a piece of glass. So similar to the T-pins and the clear tape, it's nice to use a glass on top of your film when you're dyeing because it makes the image really flush and really close to the shirt. So that'll give you a really good print because you'll notice that when you put it outside in the sun, underneath the film will start to condensate and get a little wet, and that could potentially give you a blurry end result. it'll all make sense when you see it come together. But from trial and error, I've noticed that when I don't use a glass, water will, like, all the dye underneath will start evaporating and it'll make the final print look a little wet. Like, it'll just look blurry, which that can also be an artistic choice if you want it to. But if you don't want that, try using a piece of glass or something that's clear to make the image flush. I got this from an old photo frame that I found at the dollar store, and I just popped the glass part out and I use that sometimes over my film. And then cardboard that I put inside the shirt so the dye doesn't seep through. And as you can see, I've used this a bunch of times. It's no big deal. You could reuse this kind of stuff. You don't have to throw it out. You can just wait for it to dry and then use it again when you make another shirt. I have two because I'll be making two different shirts today. And like I said earlier, I have two different sizes of my negative because I'm making two different size shirts. I'm making a large and an XL. So when I go over XL sizes, I start using a bigger negative because I want the print to look good on the bigger sizes. So this was printed with a bigger printer. If you don't have a printer like mine that can print as large as this, which is probably legal size, I think this is printed on 11 by 17 transfer paper. You can go to somewhere like FedEx office or your local library and see if they have a bigger size printer that you can print bigger transfers on. This smaller one you could use with any inkjet printer. Make sure that we get a very good print. You want it to print very opaque. So in order to get this very dark, I just run it through my printer a few times and let it dry in between because it can potentially smear because of the way that this paper is a bit shiny. So these transfers, you could get it directly from Jacquard's website, or you can buy some kind of knockoff brand or cheaper brand on Amazon, or even from FedEx office, they sell these transfers. And if you need a tutorial on how to turn your pictures into a negative like this, I use Photoshop and I upload my picture into the app. I turn it into black and white and then I invert it. But if you don't have those apps, you can use the Jacquard website. They have a free generator where they could turn your pictures into these very easily. I'll link everything in the description. So this is how I set up my shirt. I make sure that it's even. You can use, there's measurement helpers that help you see when it's center, but I just kind of eyeball it. The way that I know that it's center is that I line up the edge of my picture with the collar, just eyeballing it, making sure that it's not like all the way over here or anything. I just try to center it as best as I can at the collar, and then I slide it down a few inches. That's typically where a design will start on a shirt. And, you know, if I make a little mistake, the shirts are handmade. That adds to the appeal of everything. So don't try to get it perfect. You want it to look good, but it doesn't need to be precise. I just make sure that it's center first before I do anything. Now I use the masking tape to kind of box in my image, and I'm not taping this down to the shirt. I'm going to eyeball where I want the tape to go and then put it under the film. So I'll show you what I do. So I take a piece of tape. I'm using my arm to keep the image in place because I'm gonna lift the film to put the masking tape underneath. So basically what I'm trying to do is box in my design. You'll see why that's important when we move on to further steps. But you see how I'm kind of like lining it up with the image? I want to box it in because this is where I want all my dye to go. So I just eyeball how much I need. And then see where it's gonna go. And if it's not perfect, that's fine because there'll be like excess dye around the edges, which makes it look kind of cool. So some people like to have it, you see how I'm getting super close to the side, so there's no room for excess dye. Some people like to keep more margin, so there could be extra dye around the edges, and that looks pretty cool for some people, but it depends on how you want it to be. I kind of want it to be tighter, a little bit neater. So this is just what I do. So the thinner tape, I use it for the thinner side of the image. This little clear part around my image is smaller. It helps me see it better. So use the thinner tape on this part, and I try to get as close to my image as I can to box it in. And now I'm gonna do the top part. Okay, So now you could kind of test, line it up, see if it fits in there. And now I'm going to fill the center with dye, just this piece. If you want to go outside the edges, that's cool too. This is just how I do it. So now I know where my image is going to go. So I put the cardboard in between the shirt. This helps so the ink doesn't go through the shirt, and make sure that it's in this little box. So now I'm going to use my gloves and one of the sponges to spread my dye. And on the back it says the exposure times. If you have direct sunlight, they suggest that you keep it outside for 10 minutes. A little bit cloudy or overcast, you want to use 20 minutes. I always do 12 minutes. It's like a safe little medium for me. I found that if I do 10 or under 10, the image gets underexposed. If I do way too much, it gets overexposed. And then I get a really dark image that you could barely recognize. So 12 minutes is a safe time zone for me when I have direct sunlight. You want to shake your dye before opening it. Put on the gloves because I don't want dye on my hands. So this part is the dye spreading, and I basically start with a line at the top and I start moving the dye down. You want to make sure that you get a really even spread because that'll make your print better. So I just do that. And I start at the top and I'm trying to keep everything within this line. You see how the tape acts as a buffer between the dye and the other parts of the shirt where I don't want dye? And I don't know if you noticed, I just got a little bit of dye on the outside, so that's gonna also dye. So I don't know if you saw, I got a little bit of dye up here. That's gonna turn dark, but you'll see. I don't want that, or I didn't want that, but that's just a part of this process. There's no point in trying to make it look super clean and perfect because this process is just messy. I don't mind a little bit of dye on the outside, but if I got a big blotch out there, I'd be a little upset. So then I take some on the bottom, and this is how I make sure I get an even spread, is I do a line at the top, a line at the bottom, and just kind of move it around to get an even spread. And I make sure that I get all the white parts. And the funnest thing about this is that you never know how it's going to turn out. Sometimes you think you get all of the white spots, and then once it dyes, you realize you missed a little spot. That's normal. So I'm pretty generous with the dye because I know I'm going to use the paper towels to dry up the excess and not completely dry it up. You do want this to be a little damp. So I press on it, make sure this helps me make sure that I get really even spread. And so all of this is going to dye the color purple. Okay, so now I take some of the paper towels and I'm going to try to soak up all the excess dye. All right, that's good enough for me. I take off my gloves so I have a better feel for my film. Taking my picture, putting it over the dye, and I like to press down to make sure it gets everywhere. And this is the part where I say the T-pins could come in handy if you want to press them down to make sure the image is really flush with the dye. This helps. Mine is kind of having trouble going in because the cardboard I use is so thin, so that's where the glass comes in handy. You can use this, place it over your image, same effect. You put it out in the sun. This is see-through, but it's also weighing it down and making it really flush with the dye. You'll get a really good print. And then you put this out in the sun for 10 to 20 minutes, depending on what you choose. It is trial and error. You're not gonna get it right or perfect the first time. Just accept that now, so if you possibly mess up, you won't be as upset. I'm gonna put this aside for now because I wanna take the shirts out at the same time. I do have to make a 3X orange shirt. The orange one, I don't know why, it was a little bit more difficult for me to spread the dye. The shirt kept bunching up in certain places, so that's another thing I want to note, is that if you have little wrinkles in it and you put the film transparency over that, it's gonna print over those little folds and creases, so you want to try to get it as flat as you can. So I'm just trying to straighten out those little creases because I want it to be a good print. Put the film transparency over it, and then now I'm going to use the T-pins because this cardboard is a little bit more soft and it allows the pins to go through. Plus I don't have another piece of glass, so I use the T-pins by pressing down into the cardboard that's in between the shirt on top of the transparency. I just pierce right through it, try to get it as flush as possible. So the other shirt, I just kind of hid it. Here, let me show you. I put this over on the side under a shirt so it wouldn't possibly die from being out here, because it can expose. You'll see when I put it in the sun, it's going to expose so fast. But if I left it over there in the sun peeping through the curtains, it could potentially expose. So I covered it up, but you don't have to worry about that. So now we're going to go outside and I'm going to take both shirts, put them out in the sun for the same amount of time, 12 minutes each, and then bring them back inside and see the final result. And it's gonna expose so quickly. Make sure that they're laying flat and I try to fold the excess part of the shirt kind of close to it, because if not, the wind, it's a little windy where I am, so the wind kind of blows the shirt over the image and that ruins your print. So I just scrunch them up like this. This one needs to be flatter. Even your shadow, like if you're leaning over it a little bit too much, your shadow will disrupt the print. So you want to make sure there's nothing in the way of your negative. Even me getting too close with my camera might disrupt the print. So I'm hoping you could see it developing. It's getting a lot darker. So now I want to see how they turned out. I don't know if you could see that little dot where I accidentally splattered, I was telling you guys about. It died. It's right there. But let's see how they turned out. After these are done exposing, you want to wash them with a specific detergent that stops exposure. If you don't, and you wear this out, it'll keep exposing. So that's very important. You want to get the Solar Fast wash. I'll link everything in the description, but you really want to use that with hot water in the machine, or you can hand wash it with hot water as hot as you could get it, because you want all the excess dye to leave the shirt so you don't go out and it turns into one big block of orange. That has happened to me before. Okay, so let's see how the orange one came out. Oh, that's so good. So when you wash it, all the excess dye will drain and it'll be a clearer image. So this is what it looks like. And it looks a little bit darker because the cardboard's in it, but look when I lift it, how it turned out. That's a really good print. I know that's gonna wash so good. So that's the orange one. This one had the glass over it. Ooh. Oh no. So this would be considered a misprint. Usually what I do with these is that I sell them at a cheaper price, but this one, you can't even see my face, so I probably won't even sell this one at all. So if it were like blotchy down here, but not on my face, then most likely I would just sell it for a little bit cheaper because it's not the best quality print. The orange one came out a lot better. This one, it looks like the dye dried up. So that could have been an issue with me putting it to the side earlier. The orange one had more dye on it than this one because I was waiting to do that. So just trial and error. Like I said, I've been doing this for years too, and sometimes this happens. Maybe don't leave it sitting so long. I think it was sitting so long because I'm filming and there's times where I have to like move stuff around, set up the camera, so that's a bummer. So now what will happen, since this was for an order, obviously not shipping this one to them, I have to make a whole nother one. And usually if I'm not going to sell it because it's so misprinted, I donate them. Like I drop them off to the Goodwill, or I use this as pajamas. So for these, the back of them, when you're done with them, you just wipe them down either with a wet paper towel, or you could use a Clorox wipe. That way you could keep reusing it. You don't have to trash them. You could keep printing with them. Just make sure that you clean the back. And then in order to make this ready to go wash, I just take the masking tape off, so that'll show you what it looks like as a finished product. There we go. Cardboard, I just let it fall out. Ooh. And then this is a finished sun print shirt. Came out really good. This is a nice one. That's how you make a sun print shirt. Very simple process. Those are all the tips and tricks. I hope it was helpful. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you have any other questions, maybe there's something I missed, but that's pretty much how I do it. The Solar Fast detergent is important. Make sure that you have that to be able to wash this afterwards. That stops exposure. As far as everything else, the cleanup process, make sure if you get any dye anywhere else, like on the floor or anything, if I had dye on the floor here and I open the curtains, it's gonna dye the floor. So make sure that you clean up your area really nice so you don't have any accidents like that, and that's it.